Of the stories we're watching right now. While gas prices have edged down a little, the stock market took a drastic drop today after new inflation numbers came out. The high price of consumer goods and fuel remained far higher than many Americans have ever experienced. What the White House is saying about when and if we can expect them to head back down. The National Archives isn't sure if former President Trump has returned all of the presidential records he took to his private residence in Florida. This became public today from communications between the U.S. House Oversight Committee and the National Archives. And as the country continues to grapple with lingering supply chain issues, a possible strike of rail workers threatens to upend that, and more, why the president is now personally involved. And later this hour, after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, putting abortion access in states' hands, a Republican senator is trying to make the practice illegal across the nation. Why some within his own party are expressing frustration about that. Plus, as we close in on the midterms, a number of Republicans contemplating presidential runs want one big thing from former President Trump. What that is and why they may need it. We kick things off tonight with the final primary contest ahead of the November 8th midterms. Voters heading to the polls in 3 states, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Delaware. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu seeking a 4th term. He had considered a Senate run late last year, but opted to run for re-election to governor instead. That decision set off a heated GOP primary in the biggest race there tonight. Retired Army Brigadier General Don Bolduc is the frontrunner in this Republican race, facing State Senate President Chuck Morse. The winner goes up against incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan in November. For more on this, Robert Costa joins us now, CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. All right, Bob, what are the dynamics at play in this GOP primary in New Hampshire? I assume it circles around former President Trump.
Scott, so good to be with you. When you look at this New Hampshire Senate Republican primary, it really is a prism into the dynamics at play, not only in the Granite State, but inside the Republican Party across the country. In the state Republican leader in Chuck Morse, you have someone who the Republican establishment would like to see as the nominee, someone they think has a real shot against the incumbent Democrat this fall. But the Trump allied candidate in Don Bolduc, even though he has not yet won Trump's endorsement, is someone who's running as a Trump-style Republican. He is stirring up the grassroots, trying to have a Trump-type fervor in New Hampshire. And it's that tension that's at the heart of this primary and so many primaries across the country this year about where the Republican Party is going and who is going to be the standard bearer in each of these major contests.
We mentioned Governor Chris Sununu and the incumbent Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan are both back up for re-election this year. From your reporting, what's your assessment of how they've campaigned so far?
These are 2 people, separate parties, who were both seen as potentially embattled this election year, and they are both still facing competitive races in the sense that New Hampshire is a competitive state. It's become one of those more purple states time and time again throughout different political cycles. In New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, you have someone from a real political lineage in that state. His father was a former governor, chief of staff to George H.W. Bush. His brother, John E. Sununu, a U.S. Senator, Chris Sununu, now finishing the family's legacy with this generation as the governor of the state, running as someone who's more out of that George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush model inside the Republican Party. He's been highly critical of former President Trump, yet because of New Hampshire's dynamics in the state in the Republican Party, he's still able to win over many Trump voters at the same time. And then you have Senator Maggie Hassan, a former governor, someone who's now a senator, and she has been facing political headwinds like so many Democrats this year, but she is also playing to issues that have really galvanized Democratic voters in recent weeks, especially abortion rights after the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe v. Wade.
Looks to me like you're in Scranton, Pennsylvania, president's hometown. So we have a huge Senate race in Pennsylvania. All eyes on that Senate race. Based on your reporting, what's your assessment of where it stands now between the Republican Mehmet Oz and the Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman?
I am in Scranton, Pennsylvania, home to the hometown of President Biden, of course, also for the Office fans out there of Michael Scott. This is a place that is in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's a working city. It's had some tough times economically. You look at through the downtown here I was walking through it earlier today, talking with voters. A lot of shuttered businesses and economic pain being felt by many here in Scranton and across Pennsylvania. You have the two Senate candidates, John Fetterman, the Democrat, Mehmet Oz, the Republican, making their overtures to voters here and across the state in their own way. Fetterman in particular has, like Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, talking about abortion rights and about what's on the ballot this fall, what's really at stake with this midterm election season. And then you have in Mehmet Oz someone who's been backed by former President Trump, but trying also to align himself with other wings of the Republican Party, facing real questions about his residency from some voters we've spoken with, wondering why he moved to Pennsylvania in recent years from New Jersey.
Also, that pivotal gubernatorial race, Republican Doug Mastriano running for governor and echoing a lot of former President Trump's false claims about the election and also shunning traditional media in the Commonwealth. How's that impacting what could be a close race against the Democrat Josh Shapiro?
Josh Shapiro is a high-profile attorney general here in Pennsylvania, has led many major prosecutions from his office, and he is someone who is seen as a potential rising national star in the Democratic Party. His opponent, Republican Doug Mastriano, couldn't be more low-profile in the sense that he does shun traditional news outlets. Last time I was in Pennsylvania, I tried to go to cover a Mastriano event, and a gentleman in a tri-corner hat said, "No, sir, you're not allowed to enter because you're from a mainstream news outlet." That's kind of the scene here in Pennsylvania when it comes to covering Doug Mastriano, though CBS News crew was able to cover him earlier today. And he's making a pitch to voters that he's a Trump-type candidate, very conservative when it comes to policies on the economy and abortion and so many other issues. He also is someone, as you've covered so deeply and well, Scott, a figure of interest in the January 6th episode, has been questioned by the January 6th committee on Capitol Hill about his role in trying to block the certification of President Biden's election in Congress. He was in Washington on the day of the Capitol attack.
Yeah, and that interview with the January 6th Select Committee didn't last very long. In Scranton, Pennsylvania tonight, Bob Costa. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, for more on the day's top political news, let's bring in Stephen Portnoy and Nicole Killian. Stephen's a CBS News Radio White House correspondent. Nicole's my teammate, CBS News congressional correspondent on the Hill tonight. Some big economic news. Let's start there, Stephen. Why did the White House have a celebration about the Inflation Reduction Act and the economy on a day the markets were tanking so badly?
Yeah, today is the 4-week anniversary, if you will. I guess it's 4 weeks it's been since the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate, health care, and tax bill. The president did not have the benefit of having the House and Senate here in Washington when he signed that bill last month. So now that they're back in session, he invited hundreds of people here for a large celebratory event on the South Lawn. And the singer-songwriter James Taylor performed his 1970 hit Fire and Rain before a crowd that's about as large as any we've seen here during the Biden presidency. James Taylor told the crowd that this is a moment for the world to come together to solve the climate crisis. For the president's part in his remarks, he did not directly address the wild ride today on Wall Street, nor the Labor Department statistics showing how pervasive and persistent inflation remains. He did mainly talk about the impact that he says this bill will have, how it'll enable Medicare for the first time to negotiate the prices of certain prescription drugs, and how there'll be tax credits available for Americans to buy certain green energy things like electric vehicles. But the president mainly stuck to that as he talked about how this is an opportunity for the American people to get a win in against corporate interests. The president says the bill will, quote, help reduce inflation at the kitchen table. That's how people measure things. But the independent analysts at Penn Wharton say, and this is their quote, that the Inflation Reduction Act won't have any meaningful effect on inflation in the near term. Scott.
A different focus on the Hill, Nicole, where Democrats are pushing to pass a same-sex marriage bill. What is the status of that bill? Days are running short. And what else are they hoping to get done in these final weeks?
Yeah, well, there is a strong push to try to hold a vote on this within the coming days, perhaps as soon as next week, if at all possible, or at least to start some of those procedural steps to get to final vote on the Senate floor. But Leader Chuck Schumer did not make any firm commitments when he was asked about the timing earlier today, although we do know within the last week or so that he has pledged that there will be a vote on this legislation in the coming weeks. We do know that there is a bipartisan group of lawmakers who have been kind of tinkering around the edges to tweak some of the language with this bill, namely Senator Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat from Wisconsin, Senator Susan Collins from Maine, who is working to try to include some language that would deal with a religious liberty amendment, potentially to assuage any potential concerns among Republicans, to make sure, for instance, that this legislation does not express support, for instance, for polygamous relationships. So, there are still discussions behind the scenes to try to see if they can move the ball forward. Leader McConnell was also asked earlier today about whether or not there could potentially be Republican support for this legislation, because at this point, that was what is needed as far as trying to secure those 60 votes. And he simply said, that, the agenda is more or less up to the majority leader, so he wouldn't really weigh in there. But as far as other things to do, we know probably the most pressing thing is likely a government spending bill that has to be completed before the end of the month to keep the government operational.
Always the threat of a government shutdown looming. Also a different crisis, Stephen. President Biden has been this vocal supporter of unions, and now he has to actively work to stop a railroad strike. What's happening behind the scenes, and how big are the stakes?
This is a significant problem potentially for the country. The president is urging both sides to keep talking ahead of what essentially amounts to a Friday deadline, the end of a 60-day cooling off period that the president sparked in July under the 1926 Railway Labor Act. What's this all about? Two unions representing tens of thousands of railroad workers say that they're making a stand for their quality of life. In particular, they want the ability to take certain days off for illness, family needs, and they say that they risk currently being penalized, being disciplined, being terminated for doing those things. So they say that this is very important. The president 2 months ago appointed an emergency board to look at this dispute and make recommendations to resolve it. That panel last month delivered a recommendation that the workers should have their pay increased by a compounded amount of 24% over the span of a new contract. And that was acceptable to 10 unions in the railroad industry, but not these two that are trying to make a stand here. So today I asked the press secretary about what might happen next, because the potential harm here is grave. We're talking about a shutdown, potentially, of the railroad network across the country. The industry says it would have a $2 billion a day impact on the U.S. economy. You could think of the spillover effects for commuter rail, because so many commuter rail lines actually run on the freight rail lines. And the press secretary today said that the president is urging both sides to continue negotiating. The president is directly engaged with the companies and with the unions. There is some history here. Going back to the 1980s is the last time this happened. President Ronald Reagan signed a bill that actually imposed conditions on the unions when they had disputes with the railroads back in 1982 and in 1986. So the question now is, to prevent a possible shutdown of the nation's rail network, is Congress prepared to impose conditions on the unions? And is the president proposed to sign such a bill? The press secretary today didn't want to touch that. She simply said that the expectation is that both sides will continue talking and resolve their dispute as they have done in the past.
One of those issues in real America that actually impacts the Beltway, because the Beltway is dependent on that commuter rail. We'll see where that goes. Nicole, in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee says it's going to investigate allegations the Justice Department under former President Trump sought to use the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York to benefit him politically. What do we know about the status of that investigation?
Well, this all came to light from a letter that Senate Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin sent to Attorney General Merrick Garland, pretty much expressing some concerns about some assertions and allegations made by Jeffrey Berman, who once served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And what he alleges in a new book is that, the office was used and pressured at times to potentially, support the president and pursue investigations against some of his critics. And so what Durbin said in this letter is that if this is true, that this appears to be concerns about potential political interference, which is why the committee is now investigating and wants to get to the bottom of it.
3 new members of the House being sworn in Tuesday night. Nicole, you spoke with one of them, incoming Alaska Congresswoman Mary Peltola, who beat out Sarah Palin in that special election. What did she tell you about the race and her plans?
She told me that she's still kind of pinching herself about this moment and about being here in the U.S. Congress. Of course, she'll only hold the seat for a couple of months to serve out the rest of the late Don Young's term. And I asked her about her chances when she runs for the seat again in November. Take a listen.
How confident are you that you will win this seat again?
Well, I'm definitely working on building on the momentum that we gained in the special election. We have shown that it is doable, but I am not 100% confident. It is not a foregone conclusion. Both of my opponents are well-respected leaders in Alaska, and I have respect for both of them and their supporters. So I will be working as hard as I possibly can for Alaskans in these 3 weeks to show people throughout our state my work ethic, my commitment to our state, my dedication to the office. And I'm hopeful that they will see that as a good indication of what I can do over the next 2 years if I'm honored enough to be selected by them.
So Peltola said she will do what she can in these next couple of weeks to try to get acclimated here to Congress. But in the meantime, she knows that she has this special election or this general election to look ahead to in November. And so she is hopeful that she can pull it out once again. But keep in mind, as you may recall, Scott, of course, Alaska now uses ranked choice voting. So that is in part why Peltola prevailed, because she was a top vote getter over Sarah Palin and Nick Begich, who in essence kind of split the Republican vote. Both are vowing to stay in this race. And so, again, it'll be interesting to see what happens come November. But either way you slice it, Peltola did make history even with this special election by becoming the first Alaska native to serve from the state here in Congress, and of course the first Democrat to flip a seat like this in nearly 5 decades.
Yeah, busy few weeks for these 3 new members of Congress, getting used to a new office they'll hold for a few weeks and running for re-election. Nicole Killian, Stephen Portnoy, thank you both. A series of new economic numbers out are painting a mixed picture. We'll dive in on what's driving down today's inflation numbers and on whether or not we can expect more of that in the months ahead. Plus, as Ukrainian forces push back the Russian military, Kyiv is renewing its call for arms from the U.S. and Europe. Will they deliver? You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Ukrainian officials say 150,000 people living in the Kharkiv region have been liberated. The country's counteroffensive has recently reclaimed more than 4,000 square miles of previously Russian-occupied land. BBC News' James Waterhouse has more from Kyiv.
Before September, the fear from Ukraine and the thought from experts was that this conflict would get bogged down. Russia had pulled out of its full-scale invasion, but was nevertheless focusing and succeeding on the east of this country. Over the past 2 weeks, President Zelensky is claiming to have retaken almost 4,000 square miles of territory. In the Kharkiv region, the authorities say 150,000 people have been liberated, and that is significant. Russia is describing a regrouping and admitting to pulling back, but all signs point to a hasty retreat. The level of Ukrainian resistance continues to surprise, it seems, but it's clear that what Kyiv wants to do is show the West what it can do with the weapons it is being supplied with. Now, the negotiating table, a peace deal, remains a long way away, but the frustrations and losses which Russia has experienced has brought it a little bit closer. Scott.
James Waterhouse, thank you. Inflation still has a steady grip on the nation despite declining gas prices. The latest Consumer Price Index report shows overall inflation did ease slightly in August, but improvements were less than expected. According to the Department of Labor, prices across the board increased by 0.1% for the month. Inflation rose 8.3% in August compared to a year ago. That's down from 8.5% in July and 9.1% in June. To break down these numbers, I'm joined by Colby Smith. She's a U.S. economics editor for the Financial Times. All right, Colby, busy day for you. But while they went down a bit, inflation is still more than 8%. What does that mean for American consumers?
Absolutely. It means that across the board, Americans are facing high and rising prices. What's notable about these figures is that it's not just in a narrow range of sectors we're really seeing price increases across the board here. And that's incredibly alarming for policymakers, the Federal Reserve in particular, which is really trying at this stage to try to bring inflation under control.
Well, even as the gas prices are going down and so many people are noticing it, the Treasury Secretary warns that may be short-lived. Why?
So essentially, it all boils down to what happens this winter The big concern is as Russian oil supply into Europe in particular eases or reduces actually to zero, there's going to be a considerable spike in energy prices. Now, what's been notable over the past couple months is we've seen energy prices across the board really come down. That's helped to ease a lot of the pressure in terms of gasoline prices for Americans. But what the Treasury Secretary is really warning is that the risks here are firmly to the upside. Even if we think that inflation has peaked at this current moment, it could very well be the case that after a couple of months of moderation, we start to see energy-related costs spiking once again. And that comes as food prices, services inflation, and other categories across the board are seeing these really persistent price pressures. So it's that broadness that I think is quite concerning.
Well, the stock market got rocked coming off that CPI report. Was that more than we expected?
I think so. I mean, it really caught everyone off guard. I think right at 8:30 when the numbers crossed, everyone collectively gasped to a certain extent. The expectation, as you mentioned, was for a deceleration on a month-to-month basis. And that was after we saw no increase in headline inflation in July. So I think people were really of the view that we were at the start of a more sustained rolling over of inflation, and that would help kind of expectations in terms of recession and how much the Fed is really going to need to do to cool down the economy. But rather, we got these pretty alarming numbers, which just mean that the Fed is going to have to keep continuing to raise interest rates. That's going to make borrowing more expensive. That's going to potentially lead to higher job losses. And all in all, that's something that's quite difficult for the stock market to digest.
Colby, the Fed's been saying they're trying to cool off an overheated economy. Any indication we're getting closer to that?
So not so far in the data. I mean, it depends on what metrics you look at, of course, but the two main economic data releases that we pay closest attention to, the jobs report and these inflation figures, are not yet showing any signs of easing. In particular, that labor market report that we saw for August showed a really sustained increase in monthly jobs growth. The unemployment rate, while it increased slightly, is still quite low by historical standards. So across the board, we're not necessarily seeing the economy respond yet to these monetary policy changes. But that being said, one thing that Fed officials bring up time and again is the fact that it takes time for interest rate increases to filter through the economy. So that might mean rather that some of that impact is going to show up later this year and into early next.
In New York, Colby Smith, thank you very much. Twitter whistleblower Peter Zatko testified before a Senate Judiciary Committee Tuesday, speaking for more than 2 hours. The former tech giant employee claimed the company has several undisclosed security and privacy vulnerabilities.
Twitter leadership ignored its engineers because key parts of leadership lacked the competency to understand the scope of the problem, but more importantly, their executive incentives led them to prioritize profits over security.
The congressional testimony is Zatko's first public appearance since raising concerns about Twitter's protocols last month. He specifically highlighted problems with the storage of user information and potential foreign intelligence agents on the payroll. First Kansas, now Michigan voters are set to decide whether or not abortion will remain legal in their state. Now, Democrats are banking on referendums like this driving turnout in the upcoming elections as South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham launches an effort to implement a federal abortion ban. You're streaming CBS News.
In a original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Scott McFarland. Here's a look at some of our top stories. A Wisconsin judge is standing by an earlier ruling which prohibits election workers from filling in the missing information on envelopes containing absentee ballots. Democrats are expected to appeal the decision with hopes of having it heard by the state Supreme Court. Plus, former Solicitor General and Judge Kenneth Starr has died in Texas. Starr is best known for his role as independent counsel investigating the Clinton administration, which ultimately led to former President Bill Clinton's impeachment. Clinton perjured himself over an extramarital affair with then White House intern Monica Lewinsky. Starr was 76 years old. And Queen Elizabeth's coffin has arrived in London after thousands of mourners gathered to pay their respects to the late monarch in Edinburgh. Errol Barnett has more on the plans leading up to the Queen's funeral next week.
Hey there, Scott. Today starts the London portion of Operation London Bridge. Tomorrow, the coffin containing the late Queen Elizabeth II will travel from Buckingham Palace over to Westminster Hall, where it will then lie in state for several days. In fact, the last royal to lie in state was the Queen Mother. She had more than 200,000 people pay their respects to her coffin. Now, eventually, the Queen's coffin will be moved on the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy from Westminster Hall just across the street to Westminster Abbey, and she becomes the first reigning monarch to have a funeral at this location since the 18th century. The funeral will be attended by heads of state like President Biden and senior British politicians, of course, including new Prime Minister Liz Truss. Afterwards, there will be another walking procession taking the coffin from Westminster Abbey over there across town to Wellington Arch. And those of you who know London well will be aware that this is at London's Hyde Park corner. Her coffin will then be taken by hearse to Windsor Castle, where she will be laid to rest inside St. George's Chapel. And that will bring an end to this multi-day mourning process for the United Kingdom's longest-serving monarch. Scott?
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has introduced a new bill today pushing for a national abortion ban after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Abortion is shaping up to be a key issue in November's midterm elections, and Graham said if Republicans take back the House and Senate, they will have a vote on the bill. For more on this, I'm joined by CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, what would this bill do? How would it work?
Hey, Scott. Well, this bill would ban abortions at 15 weeks, and this is stricter than measures that Graham and others have supported in the past, a 20-week ban, and seen as less strict as some of these other measures we've seen passed at the state level. So this is an attempt by Graham to essentially find some middle ground here and possibly try to gin up support among the Republican base ahead of this year's midterms. But you've got a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill kind of frustrated that he is introducing it at this point. But what's significant here is that this would be a federal restriction, and this really flies in the face of what Republicans have been arguing in light of the Supreme Court ruling that this should now be a decision that is up to the states.
Well, what Republicans, those in competitive races, would want to run on this? Are there some subset of Republicans in competitive House districts, competitive Senate races, that would want this on their campaign list of things to do?
Essentially not really, Scott, and that raises the question of why Graham is doing this, especially on a day where Republicans thought that they could really focus on their criticisms of the Biden administration with the new numbers showing inflation at about 8%. They felt like this is an issue that they want to run on, inflation, the economy in the midterms, and not necessarily abortion. And that comes after this, what we've seen in a lot of these competitive races where you've had Republican candidates really tempering their responses to abortion, erasing in some instances past stances, supporting restrictions. And that shows that this is a politically fraught issue for Republicans in these key races heading into the midterm. They're looking at all of the data that we've been looking at, which is that you see that this is a base energizer, especially for Democrats, but also resonating among independent voters. And we've also seen voter registration tick up in light of Dobbs. And so Republicans, by and large, have not wanted to focus on abortion. Interestingly enough, if you heard Mitch McConnell earlier today, when asked about this, he pretty much said it all, which is that he said most members prefer this to be done at the state level. So not only do they fear that this is something that could energize Democrats, but they also fear that this goes against the argument that they've been making all along, which is that this is an issue that should be decided by the states. And you can bet that the Democrats have been running with Graham's press conference earlier today, trying to paint all the Republicans running with this broad brush that Republicans, if they are to gain control of the House and Senate, would push for a federal ban. And that's not something that Republicans who are wanting to win these races want to be talking about.
There hasn't been much of a sample size in head-to-head races for Congress since the Dobbs decision. But what have we seen so far? How has this manifested itself in the midterms?
Yeah, it's a good question, Scott, because we're trying to figure out how exactly this issue will turn voters out to the polls, if at all. Democrats say that they're encouraged by that House special election in New York. They're encouraged, of course, by the Kansas referendum. But those are just data points, and there are, few ways to really tell how this will engage voters. But one of the ways is to look at voter registration. And I talked to someone at the head of Target Smart, which analyzes a lot of this voting data, and they saw in about 40 states that registration among women has ticked up in 40 states since the Dobbs decision came out. And they've especially seen a rise in states like Kansas, where you have that abortion referendum, of course, but also in states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Ohio. What do those all have in common? They have big ticket Senate races and some governor's races as well. So that's at least one measure at this point that we can see at least enthusiasm. The big question, however, is do those new registrants actually turn out to vote in November? And that will be the work done by these on-the-ground groups to try to make sure that this actually does manifest itself into votes.
Caitlin Huey-Burns joining us tonight from Washington. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says deep political divisions in the U.S. send the wrong message to our enemies. Speaking Monday with CBS senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge, O'Brien highlighted potential foreign threats stemming from domestic extremism.
Do you have any concerns with the recent polling? We've seen it here at CBS News that Americans believe democracy and the rule of law are under threat.
Well, I am concerned about that. We have to have faith in our institutions, and we have to understand that sometimes we're going to win an election. I've been on the losing side of elections. Sometimes we're going to lose, and when we lose, we have to, embrace the winner. Look, the mob attack on the Capitol was a disgrace on January 6th. So, we've got to get away from this kind of the political violence and the extremes on both sides appealing to folks that might engage in that kind of behavior, because it's not only is it not good for our democracy, it encourages our adversaries. If they see that type of behavior, they assume that America's weak or that we're so consumed by our internal affairs that we can't respond to an invasion of Ukraine or an invasion of Taiwan, and they might miscalculate and start a war.
O'Brien was among a small group in the last administration to acknowledge President Biden's election victory and to commit to a smooth transition of power. He spoke with the January 6th Select Committee last month. The 2016 runner-up for the Republican presidential nomination says he may give it another go. What Texas's Senator Ted Cruz says needs to happen before he makes a final decision, and when that may be. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz is flirting with another bid for the White House. Cruz has said he will not rule out mounting a campaign and tells the Washington Examiner his decision won't be final until he knows whether or not former President Trump mounts a comeback bid. Cruz ran for president in 2016 and finished a distant second in the GOP primary. The author of that article is David Drucker, who joins us now, senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. David, real good to see you again. We know Ted Cruz is in the same boat as any other Republican thinking about a White House bid, waiting to see what Donald Trump does. Where's he likely to land on that? Where are the others likely to land on that?
Well, it sort of depends on who you talk to and when you ask the question. Of course, I recently posed this question to Senator Ted Cruz, and he assured me that no matter what other Republicans are telling me about whether or not they'll run for president, regardless of whatever former President Donald Trump does, they're clearly only going to make a decision after Trump makes his decision, and anybody else who doesn't do that is a big idiot. And Cruz was really sort of candid in terms of how he looks at this. I really think it just depends, Scott, on who you talk to. I've talked to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about this. I've talked to people very close to former Vice President Mike Pence about this. They all assure me that those two individuals are going to make their decision irrespective of Trump. And look, Mike Pompeo went so far as to tell me that if you're only going to run for president because Donald Trump does not, you have no business being president, because you have to feel that you have something unique to offer the country and be so compelled to offer it that it doesn't matter what anybody else does. But I think Ted Cruz was hitting on something, which is nobody likes to lose. If Donald Trump runs, it's a completely different Republican primary than if he doesn't. And Cruz wants to know where he stands if he decides to pull the trigger. I know that he wants to run. He tells everybody he wants to run. And that's not hyperbole. He really wants to do it. What I don't think he wants to do is go through what he went through in 2016. I don't think he wants to believe it's futile from the very outset.
How is this failure to formally declare candidacy so early in a cycle impacting others? Would there be other candidates, you think, who would have declared this early if Donald Trump ruled it out?
No, nobody's going to declare this early. Only Donald Trump might declare this early, according to Donald Trump. Most Republicans, just about every one of them, in fact, I'd bet 100% of them, will adhere to protocol. And protocol says you help your party in midterm elections. Then the very next day, it's every man and woman for himself, and they're free to begin their presidential bids. And they do, even if it's very quietly, as they start to chart strategy and hire strategists for a presidential bid. So I think the reason this question exists is twofold. One, we've seen so many Republicans traveling to key early primary states like Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and other big presidential battlegrounds throughout the 2022 cycle. They're doing it to help Republicans on the 2022 ballot, but it's unmistakable what they are also doing. Laying the foundation for a presidential bid, getting their name out there, collecting allies and support if they end up running for president, which is something they intend to do. But because Donald Trump is such an unusual figure, Scott, usually when an incumbent president loses their reelection bid, the party gently tells them to get lost and don't come back. And that includes voters. And so we all know that the party is going to turn a page, even if that page is to the runner-up from the previous Republican primary. And in this case, that would be Ted Cruz. But because Donald Trump has retained the support of the voters, because he wants to run for president again, so he says, something we never heard from George H.W. Bush, something we never heard from Jimmy Carter. There were some glimmers from Gerald Ford, but he never actually pulled the trigger. So because Donald Trump wants to run again, so he says, and has such support inside the Republican Party from its voters, it has created all of this speculation and uncertainty about what the 24 primary could look like.
Well, you mentioned a few names, David. What else can you tell us about the Republicans who may be making moves toward a run already?
Well, we know that Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, wants to run. I think what's unclear is whether he'd really run if Trump also runs. I believe that Pompeo and Pence intend to run, even if Trump runs. Larry Hogan, governor of Maryland, the one outlier, non-Trump candidate, probably intends to run, regardless of what Trump intends to do. We know that Senator Tom Cotton wants to run, but he's younger, and I don't know that he'll pull the trigger in the event of a Trump candidacy. In fact, I would bet he would not. We know Marco Rubio, Florida senator, would like to give it another shot, but I also know, and I reported this in Trump Shadow, that of all of the aspiring Republicans, I think he is particularly not interested in launching a bid if he feels that Republican primary voters are not interested in what he is selling. Rick Scott, chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Florida senator, wants to run for president. Will he? It's unclear, but it's something he wants to do. Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, interested in giving it another try. We also know, Scott, that Chris Christie, of all of the Republicans, whether or not it could ever work for him, seems to have learned one lesson of 2016, which is if you want to be the top dog, you go after the top dog. And he's been among the few Republicans willing to criticize President Trump quite sharply for how he handled the aftermath of the 2020 election and everything relating to the insurrection on January 6th, 2021. So Chris Christie, I think, is an interesting candidate to look at. Finally, I'd point to, and I'm leaving some out here, but let me point to, finally, Glenn Youngkin, Virginia governor. He cannot run for re-election in 2025 in Virginia. That means that he could launch a presidential bid without people saying, but why don't you at least finish the job in Virginia? And his team looks at Youngkin as the kind of conservative who might provide a really favorable contrast with Trump. He doesn't come with the baggage of the traditional Reagan-era Republican Party that had worn thin with the Republican base. And yet he's got this sunny disposition, this happy warrior way about him. And he won in a +10 Biden state in such a way that at least his supporters believe that up against Trump, he could win a contest by telling voters that I'm new and I'm fresh and I don't have Trump's baggage, let alone the old Republican Party's baggage. So he's one I would keep an eye on.
On the campaign trail, on the road, David Drucker. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Alex Jones's second trial began today in Connecticut over him calling the Sandy Hook Elementary School mass shooting a hoax. Jury members are deciding how much money Jones and the company which hosts his internet show should pay 8 victims' families and an FBI agent who responded to the shooting. All of them faced harassment and death threats as a direct result of Jones's false claims, for which he was found liable last year. The one-time vocal supporter of former President Trump admitted under oath he believed the mass shooting had occurred, despite publicly saying several times it was staged. A Texas jury ordered Jones to pay nearly $50 million to the parents of one Sandy Hook victim last month. We're going to take a quick break, but now's a good time to remind you, stay up to date by downloading our CBS News app. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Health officials in Los Angeles County have recorded the first death from monkeypox in the United States. The CDC has confirmed the cause of death and noted the patient was severely immunocompromised. A different monkeypox patient died in Texas last month, but the virus has not been confirmed as the primary cause. Nearly 22,000 cases of monkeypox have been reported across the U.S. California has had the most, with more than 4,000. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
A regal procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall as Great Britain's royal family escorts Queen Elizabeth's coffin past adoring fans from around the world. Live coverage Wednesday. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Hello, I'm John Dickerson. Welcome to